So hello everyone. Today my guest is Tor Even. He is the Director of Business Development in Helthjem, the fastest growing distribution company in Norway. We'll talk about the digitalization of non-IT companies. What is the best way to start this process in your company, and whether it is a good idea or not to manage a bunch of IT projects at the same time. So let's start. Tor, thank you for participating in this interview. Could you please tell us a bit more about your current position and your responsibilities in Helthjem?
Sure, no, thank you for having me. My name is Tor Even Blom-Ramberg. I work as the leader of development and innovation in Helthjem. So my job is basically to find new business areas and grow existing business areas in new directions. So we do that along several axes, but typically our main business is distribution. So it's typically a variant of services for moving goods between businesses and consumers or between consumers. So B2C is business to consumer and C2C is between consumers, consumer to consumer. So that's our main business, and to make our company competitive, we also invest in software solutions aligned with our main business, so aligned with our distribution services.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned that you have the same in the same time you have two positions, like head of innovation and head of business development. So the head of innovation, director of innovation, is quite unusual role in the company. Not all the companies has this role. So what was the root of the management decision to set up this role in the company and to invite you in Helthjem? Could you please share? Do you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, so my original position was Director of Innovation, and when the Director of Business Development moved on, I took over that role as well, and I kept my old one. But the main reason to have sort of a dedicated head of innovation is basically to allow new growth areas to get room, to sort of have focus to grow. Traditionally, one of the things that's difficult is to sort of grow new businesses inside of existing verticals or existing business areas. Typically, the existing business will take so much of your energy and so much of your focus that you never actually have time to sort of do new stuff. And what happens is the new stuff you do ends up being much smaller than what it could be because it's very aligned to existing business. So the specific reason I was hired when I started 4 years ago was that our company was at the time a B2C distribution company, so a business to consumer within the e-commerce space. And they were thinking about and looking into the C2C or consumer to consumer business, which is very different, but aligned with marketplaces, so second-hand sales. And there's a lot of differences. You know, the customer is different, the service is different, the requirements from the consumers are different. So putting that inside of the development box for our B2C business would just kill it. So it's in order to grow new areas of business, and of course you can do it in. I mean, it doesn't have to be a head of innovation. You can, but you do need to have a dedicated team. So you need to have people who are solely dedicated to this new business in order for it to grow into its potential.
Okay, thank you. And does IT connected with this new business strongly or not in your case? Could you please tell this?
Yeah, so in our case, that's one of the interesting things with the C2C business as opposed to the B2C. In the B2C business, you are a back-end provider. So basically, you're providing distribution services, and then the e-commerce, the web shop, have all the IT solutions, and the consumer is basically communicating with the web shop directly. And all we do for them in a simplified manner is just move the goods from A to B. In the C2C space, it's very different because there's no, both parties, both the sender and receiver, are consumers. they don't have an IT infrastructure. They don't have requirements in the sense of, this is how we do business. In effect, they're all different. So what we have to do then is basically build the IT bridge for them. There are big marketplaces where we could sort of operate almost like a e-commerce solution, where a transaction model would be relevant, and we are integrated to several such parties. But when we started, there were actually no companies in Norway doing C2C transactions as an integrated part with freight and payment and so on in the market. Around the globe, there were several, but in Norway, there were none. Now there's three in Norway, three marketplaces that integrate. So for them, we have sort of a B2C solution, which basically we do the freight between two consumers, but we don't provide the IT services. But most of our C2C volume is directly booked with us. So we have direct consumer relations, direct customer relationships. So it started a whole lot of stuff. It started direct marketing towards consumer, which we didn't need to do in the B2C space. It started IT development in the consumer space. So our web page went from a pure "This is us" page to a consumer interaction page where they can do bookings, they can do tracking, they can do interactions with us in several levels. And also it opened the need to develop sort of more specialized solutions for the consumer market. So think of an app or a payment solution, that sort of thing.
Okay, great, thank you. And it seems like a lot of IT projects in one initiative. So you need to develop a lot of things in the same time. And how did you manage it? I mean, like it was a couple of projects in a row. And do you have maybe something on your side, something you gave to your vendors? So what was the plan and how it happened?
Yeah, so we actually started out with a multi-vendor strategy for the simple reason that we didn't have an IT staff at all in our office. I mean, we were totally non-IT. And we realized very early on that there are things where we need IT expertise, and they were slightly different depending on the business area, basically. So in one area, in the B2C area, integrations is very important, and knowing the existing software portfolio and our customers and the integration partners. So there's a lot of established players whom we needed to integrate towards, and we need to have a strategy for that. So that was one example, one area. But when it comes to the consumer part, we needed basically to experiment more, but what we needed there was a lot of basically UX capabilities, understanding the interaction flow, web page development, and interaction flow with consumer type of problems. And we knew we didn't know, I mean, we knew we weren't good at any of those ourselves. So we needed to buy the expertise outside the company, and that's what we did. So for one area, we found a company that is very good with the integration area. For another area, we found something that's very good with the web page area or the consumer interaction area. And then we have a third sort of area, which was more, let's call it standalone applications or experiments, where the idea was to sort of be able to experiment fairly easily. So the flexibility of the provider was important. And then also at the same time ensure that we were able to scale. So imagine a prototyping or a fast prototyping unit with the ability to scale. And that was how we came into contact with Asperity.
Okay, great. Yeah, we started this project about 3 years ago, I guess. So I understand that you have new initiative in the company. You want to go to C2C market, and but I mean, it's not obvious for me how to connect the intention with the concrete product idea. So how did you come to this idea? for this project, Flashsales, which we started with you?
Okay, so as I explained, the B2C market was the original, and then the C2C market was sort of my original mandate. But once the C2C market started growing and started to sort of have its own life, then we started to experiment in new areas. And the new area we were experimenting in were basically, we're owned by a media company. So the media company sells advertising, and we sell logistics services. And these two together form a potential for an advertisement with integrated web shop, basically, or a D2C, a direct-to-consumer solution where there's no web shop in between. So it's sort of bridging. It's a B2C play, so it's from a company to consumers, but it's using other parts of our parent company's infrastructure in order to build a package that is applicable to the direct-to-consumer market. And that's where we knew, okay, this is an area that requires new tech, it requires experiments, it requires, we may fail initially because we're not sure about the market. And that's how we started the cooperation with Asperity. So this is sort of our third innovation round, if you will, with a bigger investment, where we sort of see the other two have paid off. They're growing, they're doing fine, but now this is where we are, and we're kind of now at the crux where we're sort of past the piloting phase, and now we're in the early stages of scaling. There's still a lot of development to do, but we see that there is commercial or there's a viable commercial core to this activity, and that's what we're going to build on now moving forward. But it's in the B2C space, which is interesting. So we moved into the C2C space, then we went back into the B2C space, and that I think is sort of core for any business development or innovation. It needs to be aligned with your core capabilities. So for us, it's freight. For us, it's transactions or physical transactions, moving goods between people. That's what we are really good at. And what we need to do is sort of add software components that facilitate that in different marketplaces. But there are similarities between the C2C and this D2C approach. Both were unexistent when we started. There were no actors in Norway doing it at all, or at least not in any scalable fashion. And we knew that we would rely on software that we didn't have, building on top of an infrastructure that we did have, the physical infrastructure. So that's how we got started. And then, of course, initially it's experiment. The very first thing we did was define a minimum viable product for us to do an initial experiment with one customer. That was actually how we started. And what we did is we actually asked 3 companies to join a competition for that particular pilot or that particular test. And Asperity won out clearly in those days on quality, on speed, on the ability to adapt, because the requirements, of course, adapted as soon as the customer said, well, really, we need to go to the left, then we had to go to the left. And it's very difficult then if you can't go to the left. So that's how we got started on this part.
Okay, thank you. Could you please describe a bit the current situation in Flashsales, maybe some outcomes, if you have something to share?
Yeah, so we've done, we have 2 sort of, call it product areas within the software we built together with Asperity. One is the D2C Flashsales aspect, which is advertising with integrated web shop. So what we do is we create an advertisement with a web shop, and this is then shown in our advertising spaces. We own, or our parent company owns, the 2 biggest newspapers in Norway. They also own the biggest marketplace in Norway, etc. And we have advertisements going on all these places. We reach millions of users every day in our advertising, and we also have physical newspapers, so digital and physical. And in the physical newspapers, QR codes and so on. But basically, that part of the business is the most experimental part. And what we've done there, we've done about, I think we're running into now 40, 50 live campaigns during the last 2 years to test different concepts, to test different sort of packaging and wrapping to see what works, what doesn't work. And we've had some real successes, and we've had some real failures in the sense that it didn't move product at all, and real success moved a lot of product. So as an example, we did one campaign with meat, physical meat, like Christmas dinner meat, which moved around $100,000 in just a week in one campaign. And then we did another campaign for a new hair product, shampoo, balsam type of thing, that just moved 9 units, 9 shampoos, which is a terrible result for a marketing campaign. But we learned a lot about what is required, and there's a lot of software dependencies. There's a lot of, an advertisement campaign goes live and stays live for a couple of weeks, usually at the most. It doesn't go for months or years. It's if you buy some advertising, you have it up for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month at the most, and then you sort of bring it down and you do something else. That's how marketing generally seems to work. And what it means is you have a couple of weeks to expose your product or your advertising and gain the sales, which is typically most of our advertisement is built on brand building, which is very different from sales driving. And sales driving requires a sort of a different type of advertisement, a different approach. And of course, pricing is important always. With a bad price on a product, brand is important. It's difficult to move product without a brand. And that was the example with the hair studio. It was a completely new brand. Nobody heard about it. And you needed more time to get convinced that this is sensible or a good product. And thirdly, also on the back end side, the infrastructure, we offer 2 variants. One is where we do all the warehouse operation for the company, buying the campaign. And the other one is that they do the job. So building infrastructure for them to do the job was also an important part here. Because initially we thought, okay, they'll send us 3 pallets of goods and we will do the distribution for them. We'll do the warehousing and distribution for them during the campaign, since it's a short period. But that actually turned out not to be the main business. The main business was actually to connect to their existing warehousing or their existing shops and actually allow local shops to sell more, to sell online. And one of the really great results we had in that area was a sporting company, a local sporting company with local retail venues all over Norway. They were opening a new venue in Bergen. And what they did is they had sort of a release campaign with, I think they had 50 products that were sort of very well priced for the opening campaign. And what happened was very interesting, because this shop then gained traction on 3 levels. We offered a pick up at store solution, which was roughly 1/3 of the revenue. We offered a online sales, which was locally roughly 1/3. So people living in the area but didn't want to visit the shop right now, but they did want to buy from them. And the third one, which was probably the most surprising for many of the participants in this test, was that 1/3 of the customers were actually not in the local area at all. They were sort of on the other side of the country. So basically the campaign had very big reach. And the reason how it worked was basically we used local newspapers. So a city newspaper, if you will, like new warehouse opening, a local campaign. Because this, and then people who read this newspaper, so typically people from this city living in another city, they were reading this and they were buying from it. So it was sort of local people not living locally. And that is a great way to sort of really expand your brand presence for a company that is, the shop is local. And the very interesting thing with this particular case, we did again around 100,000 in revenue over a couple of weeks in clothing and so on this particular case. And the interesting thing is this shop is also one of Norway's biggest web shops, but it's a separate operation. So inside this company, they have the physical stores and they have the digital store, and they sort of live apart from each other. And the marketing they do for digital sales goes this way, while the local sales only advertise locally. So what we were able to do was actually lift the local sales up to a regional and national level, giving the individual stores more value for the company. And that was a real eye-opener for both the company and for us, that there is a space, if you will, in what is traditionally called omni-channel, where the local store becomes a hub for, regional and national sales. So that was a really a good sort of learning experience, but there's still a lot of challenges. The main challenge is that local stores or physical stores, they don't know that this is possible, and they're very afraid of the physical aspects of it. Oh, do we have to have a warehouse? Do we have to have the warehouse located inside our shop? We have to have dedicated staff. It's just for a couple of weeks. It seems like a lot of extra work for that, etc., etc. So now we're working a lot with the sort of back end logistics to make that as simple as possible, plug and play. So it's kind of like a dark store situation where you can just buy the service, the complete service from us, and we handle everything. We handle customer service, we handle pick and pack, we handle transportation, distribution, etc. So the only thing you need to really think about is, what is the image I want to have, and what is the pricing point I want to have. If you have control of those, we can facilitate the rest. And it's a very interesting space. We think it's a potentially very big space, but it's still very small compared to our other businesses. So it's a growth area. So the other side that we're doing in parallel, and this is sort of for people doing new business development, is always about managing risk also. Because the same technology that we developed for this campaign solution, we are using also for returns to e-commerce providers. And that is a segment we knew would get traction because we already had the outgoing flows from the customers. We already had millions of parcels being distributed for them. So we could then upsell and say, well, we can also simplify your returns for you, both on the logistics side, the service there, but also on the IT side, because what we could do then is say, we can actually provide you with the whole infrastructure for returns, not only the transportation. And once customers understand that we can actually give them the return service without any IT integration. So basically, there's a no IT solution to change return partners, then they wake up. And we see a lot of traction in this space recently. The main challenge there, of course, is convincing existing salespeople, etc., that it can be done and it's simple and it's safe and so on and so forth. But once they start learning that, well, this is actually quite easy, then it starts getting traction. And we've had last half year, I guess, is the correct time frame. We've had a lot of traction on the return side, which was sort of the safe bet for us within this new business. So the D2C was the risky new venture where it'll probably take years to establish the full potential. And then on the other side, there was the returns, which will probably establish a very big potential, realize a big potential within a year from when we started selling it. So that's sort of how we think about it, sort of taking big risks, but at the same time allowing for some risk mitigation within the new business area.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. For me, as a not the person who not connected with distribution, was the most surprising that return shop has a lot of potential, and it's really cool that you provide the services and how it works, because it's not obvious. It's obvious that everybody want to sell, but it's not obvious that there is a process which is not maybe working good sometimes, and you can help with it without very easily and do the returns for the customer. It's really cool idea. And I always wondering how you connect. So as I understand, you have this North Star metric like uh, packages delivered, yearly packages delivered, or monthly, I don't know how you track it, and that all your IT products are working on this metric. So as returns, campaigns, everything. It's really cool. Okay,
And I think
thank you.
that's, if I could
Mhm.
just add a comment there, it's I think it's important for any company, no matter which space you're in, to be very clear on, if you call it the North Star metric. I mean, what is our main priority goal here? And for us, it's definitely moving parcels to and from consumers. That is our business. We don't do business to business parcels, for instance. That's not our business. Maybe in the future, who knows? But there's not. It's not the same business. It's a different type of approach, different needs, different tech. It's a completely new business again, where you'd have to take, building risk, etc. But being very clear on aligning your experiments, aligning your investments in IT, etc., to your core business. Everybody can't be the same. Everybody can't be Google or Amazon or Facebook. You have to find your basic product, and then you have to iterate and build services on top of that, and hopefully as quickly as possible. That's that's sort of where the goal is.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's good that you need to be very focused on your current business. But did you have maybe some of the failures with the IT projects? I mean, like, for example, maybe you wanted to, maybe when you weren't so focused on your current business. Could you share something in this perspective?
Yeah. So the area where we haven't, well, there's one area where we failed outright, but it wasn't actually due to software. The software was a component in it. But it's a business to business transport. We attempted that at the same time that I started. We also attempted a B2B investment, where the numbers were very clear and very good. The idea was very solid, much more solid than the C2C case, which was much more risky. But the reality was the competition was just much, much higher than we thought, and our capabilities weren't as strong as we thought, also in the IT side. So we have a back-end IT, if you will, sort of like a distribution IT, which is fairly modern, but there's certain areas where it's weak, and one of the areas is basically what's called line haul transport services. So the big cars moving big pallets to and from terminals and warehouses. That's an area where the software was weaker, and it proved much more difficult to develop into that capability than what we expected, because our whole business was at the time optimized for one direction. It was optimized from the e-commerce provider to the consumer, and then suddenly we were going to move between. So we tried the between consumers, that succeeded as a second step, but we also tried between businesses, so between central warehouse and local warehouse, that type of thing. But the timing was wrong. We couldn't be there at the right time without investing in new cars and new infrastructure. We were there, at 6 in the morning, 6 a.m., while the warehouse opened at 8 a.m. or something. And there was a 2-3 hour period where, what do we do with the goods in between? Do we wait, which is expensive, or do we sort of just dump it here, which is risky, theft and so on, or do we get the keys? So, there's a lot of talk about, okay, electronic keys in order to get into the warehouse and so on. But it just, there were too many ifs and buts, and the business to business market moves much slower than the C2C or the consumer. So the consumers, they were willing to adapt and find a way, but the businesses, it's just much slower. You have to adapt, or you have to be much more similar to the existing business than you have to be with the consumer. You can always get consumers to try something new. With businesses, it's not always the same. They tend to be conservative.
Okay, thank you. It's really interesting. Okay, it seems like we almost out of time. So the last question from my side: if you give the last minute advice for somebody who is about to start the first IT project in the company, what it would be?
Well, the first advice would be don't hire people. Don't hire people internally. I learned that lesson many years ago in a previous company, which was actually an IT company, which is weird. But it in our local market, Norway, it is very difficult to get high quality employees at a sensible price, to put it simply. There are high quality employees, but there are very few of them, and they are very sought after. So the competition is huge. And what happens then if you aren't the brand of the day, if you're not Google or Facebook or something like that, then you don't attract the best. And if you don't attract the best, what you end up getting is sort of second-rate IT solutions, second-rate IT, which may be okay for sort of back-end or secondary functions. But if you're really trying to break through in a space, if you're really trying to impress the market, you do need to pick up expertise within that particular segment. So whether that is, integrations, or whether that is UX design, or whether it's, app development, or whether it's specialized software within some specialized business, then you really need to learn quickly that you won't be able to be the master of all arts. You need to find out what are you good at, and then what are sort of the golden nuggets that you can add to that, and who knows how to do that. And in our case, as I said, we have 3 separate IT providers for separate problems. It takes a little bit of management to make sure you sort of don't waste resources. But as long as you're very clear on the priorities or the reasons why you choose this provider or that provider, then you're fine. And in our case, we haven't actually we've had the same 3 providers for many years now, and we're happy with all of them. So it's kind of you find your partner is kind of like getting married or dating. You have to find those who have the complementary skills that you need, and you need to also be able to talk with them. Because if you're not yourself the IT expert, then you need somebody who can sort of bridge the gap for you. Somebody who can say, okay, you said pink, but what you meant was reddish and big. You need to sort of have that nuance in the dialogue, because otherwise it's difficult. If you just get an external developer from a third party, and you put a sort of a business manager locally, and that you just talk together and just make it happen, it usually fails. You need sort of a team leader or a project manager or something on the other end, or on one of the ends, which sort of understands the actual transformation between IT and business. That little segment, which it may be small details in the individual project or in the individual dialogue, but if they're not solved, then the whole thing just doesn't coalesce together. It doesn't make sense. So, for instance, in our case, take the D2C example. We know nothing about marketing, as an example. So we had to align with the marketing people, with the people who sell advertising, and sort of work in parallel with them. We didn't know anything about user expectations when it comes to sort of online shopping. So what we did there is we knew, okay, we had the advertising, and we had the web shops that we could talk with, but they were in a different segment. But we actually talked with the D2C companies, so large companies in Norway who sell retail products, so shampoos and whatnot. And then we knew that we had to experiment a lot. We knew we had to take something to market quickly to see if there's traction, because that is, at the end of the day, if you can't see traction, if you can't see that there is a certain interest in elements of your product or your process, then you have nothing. If customers don't verify that what you're doing is sensible, then it doesn't make sense. And then, of course, from the IT partner, you need to be willing to iterate. You need to work lean. You need to not sort of commit to previous mistakes, if you will. So in our case, one of the things we had to do was we learned a couple of things about scaling, where we realized our first approach was just not scalable, because we thought initially that our product would be, okay, you're selling somewhere between 1 and 10 products in our solution. So our sort of integrated web shop, it needs to allow up to 10 different products, but you need to be able to sell thousands of units. That was sort of our initial premise. But then we learned that no, our customers actually want to sell 50, 100, maybe even our biggest customer in number of items is at 500 items, products for sale in the shop. And of course, we built it for 1 to 10 products. So there's a whole lot of learning in both in scalability and also in the user flexibility when it comes to, okay, when you have 500 products, then you have to start talking about search. You have to start talking about, categorizing and so on, which weren't on the radar at all when we started this project. And then just accepting that is a change we need to adapt to, and then being willing to enable to do that change. And that's where we've been very happy with Spirity. We've worked together for 3 years, and we've gone through at least 2 or 3 sort of major software transitions within the solution during that time. So it's been a good ride, and we expect to continue and see growth. And now for us, the D2C is still very early stage when it comes to scaling, but the returns is already scaling and is already a going business for us. So the software is already paying off, but we expect to gain even more from it moving forward.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I guess it's great advice. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much, Tor, for participating once again, for your helpfulness. I really appreciate it. And if you have something to add, please do this. If not, we can finish on this point. At this point.
Yeah, no, I think just final note. We've been very happy, and I think initially at the very beginning of our cooperation, the most important thing was flexibility. Mm-hmm. We needed to know. That's why we started with a test or a competition, because we knew that if we had a partner who already at the start was, it's difficult to be in a competition and we need to allocate resources, and and you have to commit 2 years up front and so on and so forth, then we can't. We don't have a starting point. So that was one of the sort of proofs for us very early on, was the ability to be flexible and to sort of take alternative paths. Because there was a lot of software providers initially that said, including our parent company's software IT department, which we could access, they were like, yeah, but you have to commit to 1.5 or 2 years, and there's a minimum spend of $500,000, and it was just you're on a different planet from where we are. We're talking about $10,000 to $50,000 maybe half a year, initially, and then we'll see where it takes us. So the flexibility has been great and has really been valuable for us during these years.
Okay, thank you very much for the feedback. Thanks again. So let's wrap up at this point. Thank you.